Can you see it?
Yes, we can see.
All right. So I'm working with legacy applications, and they have a tendency to take 1 to 2 minutes to start. And it can be even worse when there is some load on the nodes. And I found it very difficult to tune the settings for the probes, especially the liveness probe, because it would kill my container before it has finished to start. So in this KEP, actually before doing the KEP, there was like a pull request dating from probably 8 months now. And suddenly nothing changed for a few months, and finally you decided to contact me. So here is a KEP, and let's talk about it. So basically, I just propose to add a new setting to the probes that would allow to specify a higher number of failures before the probe succeeds for the first time. And then it all reverts to the same behavior as before.
So basically, you try to introduce another field. So combine this field, two fields actually. So you basically could solve the problem either like the workload has the slow startup, but meanwhile you could probe more often and avoid like long waiting.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, just today's initial delay seconds, you feel like either you have to add really long delay for the startup, or it's just not delay enough, especially on the resource starvation situation. And so then Kubernetes miskilled your workload.
Yes, exactly. If the initial, so there are two things with initial delay, is that first of all, the probes are not run at all. So I don't know if my container was up at some point or not. And if the container starts and then has a deadlock within this this long period of time, it will not be killed.
So how this is what you introduce like the initial failure account interact with the initial delay second? How you plan to in your proposal? Sorry, I didn't look at the detail about your proposal.
Yeah. So well, basically, the initial delay still exists, and then when you start running the probes, so after this initial delay, you start running the probes, and if the probe if the probe succeeds, then we mark somewhere that the container has started successfully at least once. And then we are back to the normal behavior of the kubelet probes. But if during the initial start it fails this max initial failure count times, then it is killed.
Are liveness probes always run at some interval? Like, is that hard-coded somewhere, or is that configurable?
Configurable, period.
Yes, period second.
So there's a separate field where we define the
we already defined.
Okay, cool.
And actually, he suggests, I believe you suggest also using that one for when you count off the number of the failure, right? So, or you use the same.
Yes, here you can see that if my my probe if my container will start will take at maximum t number of seconds to start, then I have to multiply max initial failure count times period seconds to be greater than T to allow my container to fully start before it is killed by the liveness probe.
Mm. I don't have further question. Any other people have the question? I'm okay with this proposal.
Is this proposed for version 1.15?
I hope so.
Okay. Not just, I was clarifying, not 14.
Okay, because 14 now it's closed. I think the feature freeze. So there was like something in the PR. There were some concerns about storing in the kubelet the state of the container, and I mean state of the probe. Sorry, and that the kubelet doesn't persist this. So if at some point the kubelet restarts, then we forgot that we succeed already once. So if there is like a very small chance that if you are really unlucky, if the kubelet restarts just before or after your container has deadlocked, then you will have to wait this T time before it is killed. But otherwise, for most of the people, if you don't use this setting, it will not change your life. And if you use it wisely, it's an improvement rather than a setback. Any more questions?
Do we have people paired up to help shepherd this in for 115? Like I don't see names on the cap, so maybe we can just start tracking.
Yeah, good idea.
Okay, I'm not very familiar with the CAP process, so I tried to fill this document. I created a pull request on the enhancement repo. And then I think I have to create an issue as well now.
Yeah, it's just, I think this 114 release is the first release where we've rolled out the KEP process. And to be honest, I think all of us are learning a bit. So where there's bumps in the road, I apologize in advance. So in the past, Dawn and I had put together like a document of the things that we thought SIG Node was tracking in a release and tried to get clear owners who are going to drive that task to completion, and sometimes pairing up reviewers and approvers were necessary. And so I want to make sure that like in 115 planning, we don't lose track of these things that we discussed as being good things to do. And so just to make your engagement with the SIG smoother, we probably should get a reviewer paired up with this. And so before 115 development starts.
Okay.
This is really good. Actually, Derek, maybe we could, do you think about it's possible, since we already have a list of the reviewer, and this is separated from this current CAP, and we could like the long from that one take turn and assign to the reviewer for this one, instead like some people like always review and some people never got a review, so we could take turn. Like the people said, we already have the couple area, right, for the SIG Node, and we define those area, and the people register want to be the reviewer for the different area. Like all the people be the SIG Node reviewer, and they can register. And then once we have the CAP and the proposal, even like the PR, just fix the issue, we could just have the system to want like the one by one rotate who could be the reviewer. I don't know. It's separate from the CAP.
Yeah, I'd love a way of using stuff to grow reviewers and then growing approvers afterwards. I just want to make sure that like when we say target somebody 115, that we need to actually like make sure people put eyeballs on something. And so um, I guess, Dawn, maybe we should walk through how to best do that. And but I think this made sense to me as well, and I'd like to see us be able to do this.
So before we figure out the formal process, and can any volunteer here? We have so many reviewers and participate in today's meeting, and any volunteer want to help the Matt to go through this whole process and this CAP? Yuji is already on. Okay, Yuji is not here. So can we temporarily just put Yuji since she is not joined today's meeting, and as the reviewer.
That's what she gets. Not coming.
Okay, Yuji.
I mean, I'd be happy to have folks at Red Hat also help out on this, right? Like, we can have reviews separate from approvals, right? And Yuju is very busy on approvals as well. So I don't know if Ryan or Robert or Seth, anyone else wants to help volunteer for this.
I'll help.
Cool. Okay, Robert and Yuji, and you guys can discuss, share the duty on this one. Matt, thank you for proposal. And yeah, we are targeted for the 1.15 release for this year.
Okay, thank you very much.
So next one, I think it's proposed by the Reno. Reno, are you here? And or maybe Derek, we can talk about the Muma manager for the SIG Node.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know if Renault's here or Connor or anyone else from the Intel team. If anyone is, it'd be great to speak up.
Yeah. I'm on.
So whoever was, I think it was someone speaking from Connor's phone. If they could try again, maybe we could hear.
I think it was Louise too. We were both trying to talk. Louise, go ahead if you're ready.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Cool. Yeah, I think it was Renaud that added it originally, but I guess he didn't make it. So thanks to Derek, the KEP has been merged. But I'm not sure if we still need to submit an exception request to track this feature for 1.14. I've put in a link to I created an issue to track all the PRs. We split up the PRs for the code to make it easier to review. The code hasn't got much review at all yet. So I'm just not sure the next steps. Do we submit the exception request and continue it with code review, or what do we do next?
I think our final freeze is this week, right?
For code?
That's called a freeze. It's not the feature request.
Code freeze, as in code freeze for 1.14 is Friday. No new code after Friday. Yeah. So yeah. So Luis and Connor and the broader team, I feel like this particular enhancement fell through the cracks when we did 1.14 planning, and I know the original design went to the community repo, and then frankly, I don't think we did the best job figuring out feature planning for 1.14, so I think we can aspire to do better the next release. But I personally would not be comfortable trying to pump this into 1.14 this late. There's a lot of PRs still to review, and I think it's a bit of a learning curve for our new processes to ensure that we pair things up early. I'm very supportive of this going in 1.15, and want to make sure, similar for the prior topic, that like we don't lose track of this in that release. So, but right now I struggle to think that it would be responsible to do it this last week.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. So for 1.15, do we just we get the reviews done? Is there anything additional I need to do at the moment for for 115, or do we just start reviewing the code? Is that the next steps?
Yeah, I think for 115, we'll make sure that I guess the cap should be updated to target 115, where I think it probably targeted 113 or 114 for what we had copied over. And then I'm happy to shepherd review on this, and probably would have asked others to assist who were interested that had looked at this in the past. So I know Seth had looked at this area in the past. I don't know if Vish is here, if he wants to jump in, or David, but I'm sure across the set of us, I'd like to unblock you guys in 115.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds good. I can update the cap as well.
Thanks, Luis.
Yep, no problem.
But at least I think because the PR already out, design also is out, we can continue. Yeah. People involved in this one, Jian, David, and Vish, as all involved in this one, still can continue to provide your opinion on the implementation. So the last one we are going to talk about, it is the team is going to update all the runtime class.
Yeah, so I'm still hoping that we're able to get runtime class to beta in 114. It's coming in pretty hot with code freeze coming up. But there's been a lot of discussion around the beta API, and so I just wanted to give an update on kind of some of the changes that are being requested, and kind of give the SIG Node community a chance to weigh in on those. So the biggest change is that per a decision from SIG architecture, we're moving the runtime class API from a CRD, like a core CRD, to a built-in API. This is kind of mirroring the decision around CSI. And the reasoning around it is kind of complicated, but basically they just decided that CRDs weren't ready to support core APIs in the current state, and that probably this will be revisited once CRDs go to GA. So moving runtime class to a core API, and the implications of that are that upon upgrading to 114, any existing runtime classes that are defined in the API will cease to work. We'll redefine the v1 alpha 1 API as part of the built-in API. So the CRD-based client will still work with that API, but any runtime classes that previously exist will need to be recreated. Any questions about that so far? And so then in terms of moving to the beta API, I think there are kind of like a couple changes to the API. One is getting rid of the spec. So runtime handler now becomes just a top-level field on runtime class. This is basically to make the API more consistent with the other class objects, so storage class and priority class, deciding that that status doesn't really have a place in those, and so then spec just becomes an unnecessary layer of nesting. Also, Tim Hawken requested renaming runtime handler to just handler to kind of, again, simplify and remove that stutter from the runtime handler on the runtime class. And then the last change, which I'm still sort of exploring the implications of this, is making runtime handler handler now a required field on runtime class. And so you'll no longer be able to leave that blank to have a runtime class that represents the default value. If you have a pod that doesn't request a runtime class, that'll still be piped through as blank to the CRI. But the expectation is that CRI implementations should now have a handler set or a runtime handler set up for the default default case. So in other words, instead of just kind of passing in an empty string to represent the native runc runtime handler, we would actually set up a runtime handler in the CRI called runc or something like that, and have that be explicitly stated on the runtime class.
To be clear, it's not user facing, so like users don't have to explicitly put some, like we'll fill in the default for them if they don't put anything in their pod spec. This is just a kubelet thing, right?
Not the thing.
Or a CRI.
It's a CRI thing and a runtime class thing. So we don't really anticipate end users creating runtime classes, but the cluster provisioner or administrator would need to configure that in the runtime class.
As a follow-up, that means import spec, user can still read the runtime class handler at any point.
Yeah, right.
Okay, great.
There's also a change out, which I'm not sure if it's going to make the 114 cutoff, to add runtime class fields to pod security policy. So this would let you set a default runtime class based on pod security policy. Any questions about those changes?
This was all separate from the pod overhead discussion last week, right?
Right, yeah. These are there's no functional changes here. It's just shuffling API fields and names around.
The only danger risk is just could maybe not, we are not promote, because if we don't finish it, we cannot promote the runtime class to the beta. Yeah. And the pod overhead is the separate topic, and it's not blocker for the runtime class beta plan.
Just out of curiosity, I wasn't at the SIG architecture meeting when it was discussed, but I'm just trying to think through like the mechanical process. So we had a feature gate called runtime class, and it had alpha storage in one format, and now we're changing the storage format to another in beta. Was there a discussion on creation of a net new feature gate name? And basically, because you've basically destroyed all previous iterations of it, or is just the idea of you were using alpha stuff, you should have destroyed that cluster anyway?
It actually doesn't completely destroy it. So for instance, if you have a version skew from your master to your nodes, those 112 nodes using this alpha CRD-based API will actually still work with the 114 master. So they'll still be able to read that v1 alpha 1 API. It just means that you need to recreate the runtime classes so that they're stored in this new format.
Okay.
It didn't come up, the idea of using a different feature gate didn't come up. We did discuss a little bit using a new API group, which would let these things kind of coexist. But that didn't seem necessary. And so this kind of simplifies the upgrade experience.
Are we going to automate it, that requisition path, runtime class object requisition path?
Well, so the initial runtime class, like CRD piece, isn't even really automated. It's part of add-on manager, but not all distributions use add-on manager. So the answer is no, but distributions that are creating runtime classes can just set up code to recreate those runtime classes on upgrade. Or if they're using something like add-on manager to continuously apply that spec, then as soon as it upgrades, it'll get applied and recreated automatically. And I guess the last update is I have a couple open PRs to add a E2E test for a non-default runtime handler. This was, it's a bit complicated because it requires some custom cluster configuration. So we decided to just add a node E2E test and configure configure the container D nodes with a test handler defined. And we can kind of gradually expand the set of configurations that have handler defined, so we can test a broader range of things.
And then the promotion of runtime class to beta, does that change any conformance test suite that would require a Kubernetes distribution to support offering more than one runtime class, or any?
No. So I don't think there's any way we can really test a runtime handler in conformance until, maybe in the future, if we define certain required runtime classes, that maybe we could have something with conformance. But I see that as pretty far off right now. It just feels too configuration specific to be conformance right now.
Okay, thank you.
So what's the requirement for the current plan for the conform test, which is the class conform test, for if you want to promote a feature or API to the beta? Do you must have the conform test for that API, for that I don't know what.
My understanding, Don, is that new conformance tests that get added to the suite are decided upon by SIG architecture, and the full conformance suite isn't the full set of features that make up Kubernetes today. And so obviously we have some features that are on the wing of Kubernetes and not necessarily the heart. And this always felt to me as something that we should not mandate every distributor of Kubernetes to support or not support particular names of runtime classes or variants of it, all the way back to when we called them secure containers, which I thought was a misnomer. So, I guess that's always been my concern with runtime class, is if there was going to be a bar that required this to get elevated to be broadly supported by every distribution in the world, which I did not think was ever the intention in the SIG.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Any other concern? Any other question related to this one? So basically, there's the good news. Good news. This is the built-in API. Simplify a lot of things in long run. And the bad news is just maybe we could miss 1.14 release to promote this to beta. We also don't need to rush, honestly, to rush to promote this to beta. But we like to have this to beta. I think that Patrick, you send you have question. You just.
It was just a clarification on how to track conformance changes, since someone had mentioned something. So it's there.
Yeah, I believe, Patrick, it's entirely gated upon SIG architecture, and so, like, I do not believe it's in the domain of the SIG to make that change.
Yeah. I mean, it's technically the conformance working group, but right now that's 100% overlap with SIG architecture members. So.
Yeah, and formally working groups don't own code, and so SIG architecture owns the code. So we seem to have it's entirely in SIG architecture, to my understanding.
Yes. Any other topic people want to talk about? Or maybe Nantal, do you want to update last time? The debug fix? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I had a quick question. So, like for SIG Windows, we've got a list of PRs that are basically, we're trying to get closed for 14. A couple of those overlap with needing review from SIG Node. Do you have some sort of tracking list that you're looking at on what you're going to focus reviewers on before Friday?
I saw the signal the UG is leading that review effort. I think no matter it's API, even like the SIG architecture talk to us, and with the Windows related API, actually UG is leading that one.
Yeah, I mean, UG has been pinged on the 3 PRs that I mentioned, but it's more a matter of just making sure that if there were, any other ones, I didn't know if you had any sort of process or if you were using a mailing list to track those last ones down.
So far we don't have, but we could talk about those process if we think about that's more efficient, and we could talk about those process. Eric, how do you think?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I go back to, I think, the 114 planning process overlapping with KubeCon at that time. We didn't probably plan as best we could. I'm more than happy to have anyone poke me on Slack and ask for review if they need attention, and would happily take a look at anything, including any PRs you link to, Patrick, as well. So like personally at this point, GitHub notifications are not the best forum, and if people have PRs that they need to get landed this week and they're on the call, like speak up now, and I'd be happy to build a list and have us start looking at them. Or come and reach us on Slack. And I think for 115, when we have a better crisping plan process, we go back to our normal order, which have been, these were the things that we were targeting, and let's have SIG meetings leading up to the end of the release saying, are we on track for where we were? And I feel like we did a good job on that in releases before 114, and probably life got in the way for all of us this release.
I think the reason we changed the format 114 is just because the much more process of the CAP process. So that's why we feel like the old way we want to give at least from my perspective, because I used to always share the planning upfront, and then we can talk about those items. But this time they have like the much more process, the procedure, the CAP process. So then basically we feel that actually could be, at least I personally feel that could be replaced the old process. And so
I don't disagree, Dawn. I just think even in my own experience, the definition of the CAP process was fluid up until the feature freeze state. And
yes.
I know many of us were writing CAPs for things that had been in flight before. And I just think the transition to new process in 114 is new learnings for all of us.
Yes.
And in 115, I hope we have a list of CAPs that we've identified as implementable or tracking to goals. And as we close out 115, we can checkpoint the status on those CAPs. I just think in 114, our process was very fluid as the project's procedures were changing.
I agree. I also like what Derek said. I'm also open if you need something for the 1.14 and you need my attention and ping me through the Slack. So let's go working together to go through this process for this release.
Okay. Well, for the one I'm thinking about, I just pinged Juju and Derek on Slack, and we'll follow up from there. So thanks.
So Nanton, do you want a quick update?
I put something in the meeting notes. So currently there's a proposed solution. Basically, for fixing the CVE, previously they copied the fancy binary into memory or temp directory to avoid people from modifying it. And now, but that added actual memory usage and cause issues. And the current, they have a new proposed approaches to temporarily create a read-only band mount into the of the fancy binary into the fancy state directly. So basically, whenever you start a container, it create a read-only band mount and use that binary instead of the original one. and the fix is still under review. So hopefully this will get rid of the memory, actual memory usage. Yeah. So if you want to review the fix, just the link is on the meeting notes.
Any other question? Any other topic? Okay, that's for today. Thank you, everyone. And talk to you guys next week.
Great. Thanks, everyone.